Hi, I'm Alice, and I'd like to introduce Luftwerk, Petra Bachmaier and Sean Gallero, who have wonderful works at the Mattress Factory Museum. Hi, Petra. Hi, Sean.
Hi,
Hi,
Alice.
Alice. Great to see you.
Yeah, it's great to see you guys. So I had wanted to talk with you a bit about your work and what goes into it and the philosophy behind why you create the art that you do. And I wanted to start with talking about your first works together. And your first collaboration seemed a contemplation of principles surrounding the changing states of water. And you projected a moving picture of clouds floating upon a melting ice block. I hadn't actually seen the piece, but I'd heard you describe it, and it set me to imagine solidity fluidly returning to its amorphous origins. And in another work, clouds came into play again with weather's passing thoughts, activating a choreography of twinkling lights along a city bridge. In one work set in a conservatory, crystalline sentinels enshrine the grace of a small fountain. In another room there, you brought nurturing light filtered through red and blue stained glass that lent its sacred quietude to flowers, giving them just what they needed to flourish. There, your elegant designs, derived from floral structures, displayed the kind of minimalism that releases the maximum associative richness and power. Another immersive installation set in an alleyway combined lyrical effects with efforts to raise awareness of the need to restore clean water to our environment. There's some wonderful images, I believe, on your website that people can refer to if they'd like to see some of those images.
Definitely.
Shall we share that?
Yes, please.
Right.
Let's go to Skywall.
Skywall. So that first project we talked about with the ice block, right here, is called Skywall. And I think this image right here that you see is what we did in our basement of our old apartment.
Oh, wow.
So we took a chunk of ice that you can get from a local ice company and you put in your quarters and out comes this block of ice. And what we did was we hung these in our basement in a grouping of, I think, 3. And we use slide projectors to project clouds. And during our research, we found that these high elevation clouds are made of tiny ice particles, ice crystals. So it was this appropriate sort of relationship to project clouds onto ice, and that had this impermanence, this sort of ephemeral quality to it, where it would melt, and we would catch the drippings onto a metal container and amplify that as well. So it had a voice, it had a brightness and illumination, but also had sort of the inherent DNA qualities of ice and sky and high altitude crystals in the sky, basically. And then from that little model, we created sort of this wall of ice and video projected from dawn to dusk, the sky as well. So it had this ephemeral lifespan of the sky throughout the evening as well.
Wow. Oh, that's amazing.
And
Really?
in a way, kind of this piece set forth like a real interest in using light to reveal a hidden characteristic of a material or a very obvious characteristic of a material. You know, it really started with the pure fascination of ice, like as it is transparent, you can look through it, it's very ephemeral. And we wanted to kind of connect it to a context that is larger than this block of ice in our hands or in our basement. And, you know, the scientific, like the substance of ice in cloud particles. And as it rains, the particles melt, and there it is, like it's raining upon us. So, you know, kind of like creating, like revealing something of what a material is. That was really kind of the search for this particular piece. And this kind of inquisitive curiosity about the environment that we inhabit kind of goes through many of our works. You mentioned the alleyway piece, which is titled Flow, where we talked about river data. So it was really based on the curiosity, how is the river in Chicago? What is in the river? And looking at these data sheets of like, how is the water kind of monitored? Like, how do we know if it's healthy? And we compared data sets between two rivers, one in Hamburg, Germany, and the River Elbe compared to the Chicago River, and animated different numbers, basically data sets. So what you're looking at right now would be the number set for E. coli, which is probably a value we most likely don't associate with anything aesthetic. But so we illuminated these data sets onto water screens. And the site for this installation was very important, as it was Chicago's first green alleyway with permeable surfacing. So knowing about the health of the Chicago River and how it could actually be much cleaner through permeable surfacing. So it was really kind of bringing the site context and the story of what we are kind of expressing into an experience that is immersive. It wants to be emotive, so it touches you without you knowing all about it. And as you discover this piece of work, you kind of start to engage or start to kind of, look at this. So there's all of this context to it. So I think a lot of our work often functions like that you can have an immediate sensation to it, an immediate emotive reaction, but then you can dive into it and go into the research that goes into these works of what we are kind of basing or kind of referencing upon.
Those are beautiful.
Thank you.
So I also appreciate your works in which you bring a sense of presence within absence to places of habitation. So a living ambiance ran through your installations for the Farnsworth House and Falling Water, and their projected forms seemed to emerge from realms of luminous immateriality and cast upon related architectural forms. Their ghostly resonance was endowed with solidity. I also like the contrasting elements for your installations in Chicago's Garfield Park Conservatory, where you overlaid suggestions of windswept Midwestern prairie grass upon its static structures. Could you talk about your inspiration for those effects that you created for some of those spaces and maybe show images if you have them?
Absolutely. So our studio is based in Chicago, and the Midwest Prairie is a very important source of information when it comes to nature. And we try and sort of project that onto our projects, whether it be the architectural projects or even just practicing, getting storyboards and putting together nature within certain projects. And with the Farnsworth House, just show the Farnsworth, we video mapped the building almost 360, and we used sort of linear geometric shapes. So those are the man-made construction from the house, but we also filmed sort of the river, the Fox River, and the surrounding nature. So that holds deeply part of the natural resources around the house and what you really experience when you're inside the house. And so we sort of collaborated these two elements together, this geometry and nature. And it's really what the house is about, is this solid form within nature and experiencing both within the house at the same time. So we also have Garfield Park, which was the beacon. And so we created this matrix, low resolution matrix on the garden house here. And that was informed by sort of the Midwest Prairie of grass blowing into the wind. And it's a Jens Jensen design, and he was greatly influenced by the Midwest Prairie. So we were greatly influenced by Jens Jensen, and so therefore the Midwest Prairie resonates with this piece for us.
And for him, the structure of this particular conservatory mimics like a haystack, and the verticality of these lines of light mimics the kind of tall grasses of the prairie. So we wanted to create a minimal but very effective gesture for this conservatory, and kind of work off the architecture in a mindful way, so it can integrate without disturbing any of the structure.
Yeah, that was a beautiful piece, and the other pieces that you had, but those were also in the Garfield Park Conservatory, with enshrining the fountain and having the flowers.
Right.
Yeah.
That was almost
Right.
a complete takeover of the conservatory, where we activated it for sort of daytime experience, but also nighttime experience. And we wanted to bring people to this location where it's located in a west side of Chicago a bit, so it doesn't get much foot traffic, but we wanted to illuminate this amazing piece of architecture that, is a historical reference in Chicago, and the whole philosophy of Jens Jensen and nature and the Midwest Prairie was a great narrative for us to really find inspiration.
Yeah, really wonderful pieces.
Thank you.
Our love for architecture started not far from you. So, it started in Falling Water.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I mean, the whole narrative for structure in nature really kind of, Falling Water put us on this journey actually. In 2010, we were invited by a curator here in Chicago to illuminate the Ruby House, which is a very iconic Frank Lloyd Wright orchid building here in the city of Chicago. And what became a new media exhibit that lasted for one night only took us onto the journey of exploring architectural spaces. 1 year after the Ruby House intervention, we went on to Falling Water and video mapped Falling Water, and we were just bewildered of how light can animate iconic structure. And also, understanding Falling Water was one of the greatest things to engage with. So we have become really fond of the region of Pittsburgh and the history of it.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So I actually grew up in Chicago. So likewise, I remember Garfield Park Conservatory when I was a kid. Really beautiful. So yeah, back at you. Appreciating our regions. So two people who complement each other may build a conceptual home to hold their hearts and reveal fresh aspects of themselves to each other over time under differing circumstances. With an open square, I appreciate the parallels to this human experience suggested in your presentation of colors in relationship with each other that form ephemeral structures under changing light conditions. I also appreciate the two rooms that are mirror images of one another, that possess complementary aspects, doubles, and perfect balance. The harmonious sound design further resonates with the sense of completeness. Your art continues to evince your synchronicity as a couple. Could you talk a bit about your individual strengths and interests that you each bring to your working process as partners?
Sure, absolutely. Let's rewind and how did we start collaborating? And I was back in the performance department of the School of the Art Institute, and I was assisting her with technology as she performed. So fast forward a few years later, we started collaborating fully on projects, but it was really that impetus of, I was usually behind the technology side and you're the sort of narrative creative end. And then now it's sort of this holistic collaboration where we both have the vision, but with that we also have, there's some tension, but I wouldn't say deep tension. It's more like we have our own individual perspectives, but within the studio, it's really finding that harmonious balance. And with color, that can be sort of the platform where we choose the harmony. So we each have our own subjective color preferences, but within the studio, within the project, there's always that harmonious balance to find that middle ground.
Sure. That's great that, your interests align and you complement each other so beautifully in your works, and in life as well. Yeah.
Yeah, we've been doing this for 20 years. So I think
Wow.
it's very
Yeah.
important to find that balance with the creative end, but also with the personal end. And I think there's really no, it blurs the line really, life within the studio and life outside. It's really, a whole life together and do things collaboratively, creatively, but, we share our life together as well.
That's great. That's the ideal, to have your art and your life, be complementary and arise from like the same genuine impulse that brings you together as a couple. So that's really nice. It's really inspiring.
Thanks.
So I understand that you intended Open Square to be a spatial experience of a standalone space, and thereby removing yourself from your customary architectural dialogue with a physical site, based in part on research into its history, a context within which your designs could then have a fitting relationship with. It's interesting that your sensorial expansive piece exists within the confines of the bare rooms of a former 19th century warehouse transformed into a place for installation art in 1977 by two visionary artists. This once rock cavern had been an empty stage upon which artists built structures to support the unfolding of a multitude of immersive stories. With your installation here, you have similarly created a site of transformative power by opening its stark walls onto your lush realm with its illusory shifting structures. And you were able to envision this work during our shared time of isolation during the pandemic, shaky ground upon which we had to gather experience without expecting certainty. But even within open spaces, meditations, and linear liquid time, there exists the suggestion that thought, memory, and perception remain continuous. Its absorbing illusions remind visitors that the desire to construct one's reality independent of fraught material circumstances is what all dreams are made of. Can you talk about what led you to want to work in a new direction for you to create this piece here?
Yeah, it was really a very unique opportunity to have the opportunity to actually bring in a full-on immersive installation to the Mattress Factory and not to compromise on the scale of it. So a few years ago, we kind of discovered the effect of light on color and created a piece that is titled Spectrum, where we illuminated 529 colors with changing video projections. So we video mapped color. And through this exploration of color and light and knowing how, like we have told you, our work really kind of went on to the exploration of architecture. We feel like at the Mattress Factory, we are actually taking on making the space how we envision it for color and light to interact. So it's a very unique opportunity for us to design or create the layout of a spatial experience that is removed from a landmark architectural vision and actually becomes a contemplative space that is purely based on color and light changes, where we are able to execute like what we have been experiencing through illuminating architecture into an installation. So when we've worked extensively with buildings from Mies van der Rohe, and with Mies van der Rohe, it's always a very one-point perspective driven architecture, very linear. So taking this linear geometry into a spatial experience where we shift your perception of the linear and actually also blur the lines and play with them so that the linear actually at one point also dissolves, and it becomes a pure experience of space and the color. So it's kind of like playing with the geometry, but also attempting to dissolve it through the shift of color and light.
Mm. Yeah, it's a great experience being there. It's just really, really affecting. So, as in your works, historical connections between sound, color, and light, dramatic variation of the light spectrum to musical notes. And some discoveries led to the idea that two colors placed next to each other would have the same effect as two notes played together, a phenomenon that feels present in Open Square. And within that installation, there's also a sublime musical sense that one color merges into another and follows it like a shadow. As the two rooms' colors and sounds play off each other, there is one point when one room burns at its brightest as the other fades into the dark. Then the contrast between the two rooms, their aesthetic of intense darkness and light, may evoke the interface between being and nothingness, seemingly shifting from one to another, that will only be registered for a moment in a visitor's mind. In this work, an intermingling of the visual and the auditory, glancing off one another's energies, has a powerful impact. What was the nature of the mood you intended to set with the interplay of color, light, and sound for Open Square?
I think color has an inherent emotive quality to it. So we didn't have too much intention between each color. We knew that it wants to be a cool room and a warm room, to kind of be opposite two squares, and knowing that once they illuminate, they would kind of do the opposite of each other. So they would kind of play off and kind of change your, like you say, one room turns into dark, the other one goes into light. So it's kind of like playing with one another. And the sound also has the quality of high notes to low notes. And we actually looked into very early musical scales where colors have been assigned to notes to create, to match how our color lighting changes with the musical notes.
Right, the seven basic notes of the music scale, and then 7 colors of the rainbow. So we used that as sort of inspiration, and created this composition of simple notes with the tone generator. And we wanted it sort of not necessarily synced to the color transition, but more or less like a partner to it in a way. So it's this, sometimes they're in sync, sometimes they're not in sync with the color shifting. So, but it allows for this meditative quality with the tones, to have sort of low tones and high tones separated, bass tones and a little more tonal qualities in it, so that you did have this journey from cool colors to warm colors, but then also the mixture in between. So the idea was also to create a journey of color and sound where one experiences, the whole transformation of space and dimension and perspective, but at a very sort of constant beat of this sound, so that you're not rushed, you're not sort of you have to go in there and go out, but sort of to really meditate on this space.
Yeah, it really, really works well, sort of on a subliminal level as well as a conscious one. It's really great. So in your earlier works, an inspiration for your organic abstractions came from Goethe's contemplation of a kind of haze that could rise between sundown and sunrise, a concept whose influence seems to subtly infuse those moments in Open Square, when diminishing violet hues suggest dusk as a state of mind, until darkness is carried into the faint glow of morning light. Within these rooms, day and night are never done. Their sweetness just seems chased into a new dimension where they linger as an endless film. The edges between dusk and dawn become blurred in these fragile, luminous sights that make one both nostalgic for the present and sharply aware of its inevitable passing. For you, do these effects of light and color fading and rising in Open Square have connotations of mysteries akin to Goethe's poetic associations with haze?
Goethe's association with haze is really the basic principle, as he explains how all colors become visible as the sun rises, and once the sun sets, everything dives into darkness. So kind of that interplay between light and dark is where the color comes to live. And I think when we also explore an installation like Open Square, there's always like a dark and a light, and kind of finding that balance where your perception of the color shifts within those two kind of opposites is really where the magic happens. So, also in the transition of the two, like if you take a bright light to a darker toned light and then you transition it, and I think within those transition moments there's always like a surprise or like a revelation of like how opposites come together and create a new shape or a new form, a new shade, so to say, a new you to dive into. So I feel like, you know, within that very, I mean, it's a principle of what Goethe is stating, and I think that principle holds true for so many light and color experiences in our surroundings.
Yeah. Wow. So your work seemed to follow in the tradition of artists who sought a synthesis of the arts. And some found a relationship between sound, color, light, and space, and set out to combine these elements for their works to reveal the fullness of spiritual qualities through the use of all senses. Are there any artists of this mindset you could cite as being inspirational for you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, definitely James Turrell, but within that realm, there's Dan Flavin as well, where it's kind of like, you know, his composition, his color, the simplicity of technology and the creation of dimension through his color, and then also the repetition of that also opens up a realm of, you know, colors that we don't usually see. So it's amazing composition for us, and to be influenced and inspired by his work as well.
And since you're touching upon the spiritual, I think what we like about Dan Flavin is actually the very, it's a rigor in using in a method that we really enjoy about Flavin's work. So there's a rigor in the execution of the work, and then there's a repetition and an alteration of repetition. And within that rigor, there is actually a very emotive quality. Once you see the work in situ, how he intended it to be experienced, you feel there is a dimension that is more than a rigor and more than a method, because it is becoming emotive, or it touches upon your whole body, so to say, because light obviously affects your entire body, not just your eyes. And I think, you know, what is really also for us, it was also very phenomenal. The first time we visited the Mattress Factory, we stepped into Pleiades.
And that's where we met you, actually. So.
That's right, yeah.
And, you know, that experience is, you will never forget it for the rest of your life, to see this type of artwork. It really stays with you.
Yeah, and I think on our returning visit to do the site visit, we also went into that space, and it's just to really disengage from any kind of color and light, and just to being just your mind in a way, and then also search for that light source. I think that whole filters everything away, and it becomes a very pure experience. I wouldn't say darkness, because there is a light, and there's all our stimulation from, you know, all the light that's in the environment. So it was a very, very impactful installation for us as well.
Oh, yeah, I'm so glad. Yeah, I love that piece. And any visitor who comes always has like a different impression of what they've experienced in there. So it does truly become a personal piece for everyone.
Just as color is subjective, darkness and lightness is also subjective for people as well.
It's yeah. It becomes this kind of generally a sort of vessel for collective meaning, but also it's so highly personal and subjective, and that's what's so wonderful about perception. Yeah, and that when you talked about Dan Flavin using technology in order to create this sort of emotive response in people, I think about your work as well, and just the idea of being so skilled at using, the whole orchestra of effects, that you've become familiar with, just allows you to create these experiences for people that are just really transcendent and great.
Thank you.
So,
intended to be, it's nice that it affects the viewer in that sense. It's not always intended that way. We also have like a formulaic approach, and we are looking for certain kind of, when you say about blurring all the color and all the pattern with a certain color effect, so that you have pure color. I mean, that's something we really love exploring, like where we can actually take you to a very pure color experience, but it is really meant as a feeling.
Right. Yeah, it opens those parts of you that do lead to these subjective responses that are really profound. So I can just start again. There's a positive healing quality embedded in many of your works. Let me know if I'm breaking up again, including within your two pieces here, Color Code and Open Square. And Open Square's weightless manifestations of color, space, light, and sonic textures slow us down to a quiet, perceptive state. And within the room, an ever-shifting luminosity stirs feelings of meditative tranquility. And there, each color seems fused to its complement, each form to an underlying network of related forms. And silhouettes of visitors drawn into these illusions become part of the system in flux, briefly appearing within the space, like the shadows of all transient things. The installation's illusions create a dynamic view that also involves visitors in a subjective relationship to all the beautiful changes and chances through which the light moves. And these effects evoke moments of trance where an interior and exterior world seem to merge. Could you talk about how you designed the elements in this work that might serve to leave after effects bordering on the spiritual? And I know you talked about, some of the techniques involved, but was there anything that you specifically designed to evoke these kinds of qualities? Or was it something that would just kind of happen from the effects that you set in motion?
I think physically we wanted to create this journey. So you have these two rooms, but you also have an entrance to go into. And I think that creates a journey, a travel sort of idea, traveling through color, traveling through time, traveling through sound. And I think with that, it gives this very emotive, meditative quality as well. So I think just sort of the construction, the architecture of the space allows for that. And these squares are sort of almost like portals in a way. So they open and close and disappear and coalesce and become one or become two opposing sort of complementary hues. So the architecture and the sound and sort of the design of the squares give that sense of traveling and journey-like approach to the installation.
Yeah, and that, I ask about the idea of portals in your work. And often here works created independently yet displayed in proximity to each other may reveal serendipitous connections that affect the flow of one's perception. And on the museum's fourth floor, where your work is, it shares its implications of portals with two adjacent works. And one artist's portals lead to longing gazes in search of a lost loved one, and the other artist to open real-time vertiginous views into a stranger's yard dangerously far below, that act as a kind of memento mori to emphasize the precarious nature of existence and the poignancy of the transitory moment. And how would you characterize the suggestion of portals that appear and vanish within your installation and the additional meaning you may have invested in them? And does the presence of the other artist portals impact your impressions of your own work for you?
That was very interesting to see those other two installations, including that sort of you journey through an experience or an installation. And portals for us, whether it be the physical manifestation of portal, or it be an architectural, or even just, you know, painted or projected, or even a light can be a threshold from one sort of dimension to another. It's really about expanding the dimension and shifting your perspective so that you can contract and expand the experience of a space in a way. And that we do that through color and light interaction, but also with sound and with the physical architecture. So this idea of portals and thresholds and, you know, gateways and contraction and expansion is, you know, it's here. It's also, you know, part of Frank Lloyd Wright's theory of contraction and expansion. So he was also a major influence philosophically about our artwork. You know, knowing his approach to architecture and nature was sort of, you know, we found a very akin sort of dimension with us. So it's a very important topic to talk about.
How you transpose from one place to another.
Right.
So, transitions. So
Yeah.
and I think that is very interesting because, like, sometimes when we think of space, it's always a very limited experience. It's like within our confinement.
4 walls or a floor and a ceiling.
And so I think with Open Square, even though we are kind of mimicking that very much, the spatial layout that defines our everyday habitat, we want to kind of like break this up a little bit,
Redefine
or like
the
redefine it,
space.
or, you know, it is amorphous. It is not solid. It is not limited. So within that space, you can actually expand.
Yeah. Were there any particular meanings that you invest in portals yourself? Just imagining like where they might lead, you know, from one space to another?
Good question. I mean, we usually think of portals also as a landscape. Maybe it's a traveling to another landscape where there's, you know, there's infinity back there, but there's also, you know, the separation of sky and water or sky and ground. So that's an element that we sort of focus on as well when we talk about portals. But usually it's also about dimensionality and spatial experience. So, you know, working with architecture, there's always this, you know, like you were mentioning, this 1 point perspective, and that's really straight on portal-like effect. And so some of the works can include that sort of landscape haze in a way, but it's really defining a space and then expanding it.
Yeah. That's great. So as some color theorists demonstrated, a color will look different depending on its placement within the context of varying hues, similar to the way a person will reveal different aspects of their character depending on who they're with. These perceptual fluctuations infuse your color code piece with its dual messages of help and hope. Here at the Mattress Factory, color code is displayed as banners hung from separate balconies in an outdoor setting where the work accompanies, along with Ralph Julius's soundtrack, Winifred Lutz's garden, the site of an industrial ruin overtaken by nature that appears as a living force of hopefulness. Could you talk about your choice for this display here and its intended emotional effects on viewers? And also if you have any images of the way it looked outside?
Let's see. Is it news or no? Well, we can show you where color code came from. And it was at the Cleve Carney Museum of Art. And it was showing the basic SOS, the dots and the dashes. And for the Mattress Factory, the placement was, you know, the museum and showing this call and response, but also this projecting of SOS, but not necessarily about distress, but about how do we react to the distress? How do we react to the times of being in this world where there's a sort of conflict and with everything. So this was in 2020 or 2021? 2020. And so we teamed up with our local graphic design firm called Normal, and we've worked with them in the past. And this was a multi-site installation, so it was across the country. And it launched on the Day of Democracy, and then it sort of culminated on the voting as well, the day of the election. So this was really about a call and response, and how can we respond to this call of not only distress, but activation. How can we be active within the community, within our voice? And so I think Danny Bracken spotted this, where to hang these pieces, and it's a great location, and it sort of is this wonderful interplay of color and shape and complementary colors as well. So,
and maybe we should say what it actually is. It's actually 3 art flags, and those 3 art flags kind of lend themselves to actually travel to different sites at the same time. It was a very spontaneous, quick project. We felt the urgency to revive this call for help, this SOS color code, as part of like everything that was happening as of last year. And so it was really a very impromptu collaboration between many people, and including the Mattress Factory, who was really open to that idea of being a venue, and with other 11 sites across the United States.
And there are also polling stations, so you could actually vote there, I believe.
Yeah, it was really wonderful to see how every venue kind of took this project in their own hands. And, at the Mattress Factory, you became a voting station. At another place, they also used it for kid activities to kind of draw upon these colors. So it was really used in a very different ways, but it brought together people to connect in a time where it was very difficult to connect, because we were also socially distant and living through the pandemic at its highest point, knowing that US election is coming up, and it was a very important election.
Right. Yeah, it was a lot of forces kind of coming together to create stressful situations, and those banners were just so beautiful, waving in the wind, set out in nature the way they were. So it was great to
connect that. It was really beautiful to know that there is like 12 sites that are all kind of taking up on this initiative.
Yeah,
connected through this forum in a very simple gesture, and took their own meaning with it.
Yeah. So the Mattress Factory made space for artists to take the next step in their development. Yayoi Kusama made her first large installations here, and James Turrell made his first art piece, Pleiades, of which you've spoken of as having an ability to sharpen our sense of vision and reveal an essence of seeing. During your time at the museum, did you feel drawn to Turrell's other pieces or the works of any other particular artists who had once been given a welcoming home here at the Mattress Factory?
Yes, of course. We are very fond of the Sarah Oppenheim piece as well. It's so bold. It also speaks about how bold the Mattress Factory team is, of taking on adventures with artists in any possible scenario. I think it's ingrained within the Mattress Factory to kind of undertake risks with artists, where it is really impressive as a whole to just go and see the works. And obviously with your history of working with Yayoi and taking on her first infinity room, it kind of resonates in many ways. It's really what the Mattress Factory for us is about, that it is this place that goes for experimentation and pushes for artists to go to the next, whatever they invent to do. So it's a really unique platform. You know, we were actually so touched the first time we visited. We saw Yayoi's model that was the proposal for the Mattress Factory, and it is amazing to see the trajectory of like Yayoi's cardboard model into the infinity room that you all still show as a permanent piece. So, you know, seeing a very recognized artist kind of in her first steps is a very unique experience. It also encourages your own creation very much.
Absolutely. So after achieving your vision for Open Square here, do you have fresh ideas for your next project?
Of course.
Yes. So we have a project that deals with also the history of color from the very first sort of categorization of that. So that's also working on that for a future exhibition. What else do we have?
And in general, I feel, you know, just seeing how Open Square lives at the Mattress Factory, it gives us ideas of how to actually build upon this experience and how to take it to another level, so to say, or actually reducing the complexity. We feel Open Square has a lot of complexity actually, and we would be interested in like simplifying even more, or like figuring out how can we actually simplify this experience and make it even less, but maybe more powerful that way. So exploring within that dialogue of color and light and space and going further with it is really kind of the trajectory that we feel like has launched at Open Square.
Oh, that's great. I look forward to seeing what happens next for both of you. And please keep me posted.
Absolutely. Yes.
I hope we see you.
Oh, well, thank you.
For the
Yeah, I hope so too. Yeah, and yeah, I really appreciate all the work and the insights that you brought to the museum, you know, to share with me and with visitors. And yeah, I look forward to staying in touch with you and seeing the next step for everything. So thank you again for talking with me today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alice.
Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.